For millennia, bees have been fundamentally important to human survival. An essential creature to numerous ecosystems, bees thrive to make our home Earth a better place. And so, begins the journey of bees. Oops, that's the wrong video.
Well, that was boring. This isn't your typical nature documentary full of facts and figures. This is the story of one person's journey on learning how to save the bees. I'm Shannon Maynes. I don't know much about bees, and this is Be Kind. Bees are so important for every aspect of our lives. Look at these trees around me. Bees. The produce you get from the grocery store? Bees. The honey that you put in your tea? Bees. Bees are so important, and I wanted to learn more about these precious pollinators. I started in my favorite place, research. I read articles about bees, books about bees. I listened to podcasts and watched shows about bees. And then I decided it'd be best to talk to some experts about bees. One man who has a deep passion for bees is Charlie Kean, founder of Beevangelist, an organization dedicated to education and advocacy for bees. Charlie has a profound respect for bees. As a newbie, he was an excellent person to talk with. Not only was he willing to help me on my journey, but he has a network of bee supporters. All right, Charlie, what's the big deal with bees? Why are they so important?
Really important to understand that without having the pollinators, most of the fruits and nuts, berries and vegetables that we've come to rely on and grow to be who we are wouldn't be. And that means that the animals that eat it as well wouldn't be. So 160 million years ago, a coevolutionary moment happened when grasses produced flowers and bees were there to meet them. And if that didn't happen, if that coevolutionary moment didn't happen, none of this would be.
So I'm a bit of a newbie. Where should I start with my research? Who should I talk to learn more about bees?
Well, you could start at the beginning. And that's maybe with Dr. Chelsea Cook and her lab at Marquette University. They've got studies that they're trying to understand a little bit more of what's going on inside of the bees.
Thanks, Charlie. That's some really good advice. I'm gonna be on my way and go talk to Dr. Cook in her lab and learn more about bees. I headed over to Marquette University to meet up with Dr. Cook and discuss her finding and research on bees. And let's just say, her findings are the bee's knees. Dr. Cook, I think we can both agree bees are pretty amazing, but you have research that proves how amazing bees are. What is that research?
Yeah, so my research generally focuses on how honeybees work together to accomplish all of the incredible wild tasks that they do inside their colony. The two behaviors we focus on is a behavior called fanning behavior, where the bees literally fan to cool their colony down, and foraging behavior, which is what bees do when they're looking for food and looking to store all the nectar that they turn into honey and all the pollen that they need for their survival. Foraging honeybees are working to get a sense of what the colony needs. So it's just this individual versus colony level balance that constantly happens in the honeybee society.
And what is the distinction between bee species, like those main distinctions?
Yeah, so some of the main distinctions that I think of when I think about different bee species is whether they're more solitary or they live essentially by themselves and they collect pollen, they lay an egg, and they let that egg hatch and take off and lay more eggs, but really just don't do any parental care or take care of that baby bee. Whereas then there's other bee species that are more social. So they will lay eggs, they'll interact with that baby, they'll help raise that baby, and they do some parental care. So that, I think, is one of the initial distinctions that when I think of bees, whether they're social or whether they're solitary, is one of the first distinctions. we think of honeybees and we think of a lot of bees as bees that make nests, they make honeycomb, they store honey. That's not typically what most bees do. Some bees are great ecosystem engineers. They will chew out the center of sticks. So instead of cleaning up sticks in your yard in the springtime, leave them out, because bees will actually burrow into the sticks and use those sticks as homes. Digger bees, that they'll actually dig in the ground and make little nests. So these are solitary bees that dig in the ground and make their nests in the ground, and we don't even realize that. So we think of a lot of bees as pollinators, and all of those bee species are pollinators, but not all bees are these big honey collectors who make these massive colonies. There's lots of bee species that are solitary, that make little tiny nests that we barely even notice in our yards. My personal bee story is really rooted in just trying to understand the social dynamics of societies. So I first took an evolution class in undergrad. In that class, I knew that things evolved, right? So like fur color on animals, or like neck length in giraffes, right? These classic ideas of evolution, beak sizes on finches. These classic characteristics of animals evolve. But in that evolution class, I learned that behavior can evolve too, and behaviors in societies can evolve. After taking that class, I was just fascinated with how societies and behaviors in societies can evolve. So everything that we've talked about today about why bees are fantastic is really what drove me to want to work with bees and want to use bees as this model system to understand how societies function.
So with your research, you have bees everywhere, and you're creating colonies and hives and things like that. You actually have some here, right?
We do.
On the roof.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Cool. Can we go check them out?
Let's go.
We headed up to the roof of the Marquette Life Science Building to meet up with our favorite striped friends, the bees.
This is just a really nice convenient spot where we can come up here, grab bees from the entrance of the colony so we can bring them down into the lab and do all the research that we need to do inside the lab.
Okay, and what is like the structure, kind of autonomy of this hive?
Yep, so these are actually two colonies. So this is a typical entrance of the colony. So right here is the hole that bees are coming through as they leave to go forage, and then coming back to store all the food that they've just collected, the nectar or the pollen. There's some ventilation down here, so the bees don't leave through this area, but there's some ventilation that happens. This is a typical nucleus colony, so it's a smaller colony. It only has 5 frames. Bigger colonies typically have 10 frames, so it's about half the size. So it allows us to do research on kind of a little bit smaller colony, which is nice to, if we need to move them or replace them, it's pretty easy to do. And we want to always put colonies up off the ground just to make sure that it's ergonomic for us for moving them, but also to keep any critters, any ants or mice from trying to get into the colony, because there's lots of tasty things inside the honeybee colony. And then we have a lid. These are this is like a little bit of a protective piece of plastic, but then we have insulated lids to try to keep the bees nice and warm throughout the winter.
Dr. Cook helped me fulfill a lifelong dream, and by lifelong I mean for the past few years. She let me try on a bee suit. Needless to say, I checked something off my bucket list today. Now I'm ready for some bees.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice and spiffy.
With a clear look at the biology of bees, I met up with a man who knows the immense benefit of bees. Kent Pegosh is a beekeeper, store owner, and used to serve as the president for the Wisconsin Honey Producers Association. So Kent, it gets pretty cold here in the winter. What do you do for your bees?
Well, for many years I kept my bees here in Wisconsin. And the main thing is give them enough food, make sure you have healthy bees going into winter, and protecting them from the wind. And bees aren't like other insects. When you think of insects hibernating in the winter, like wasps and so forth, bees are actually do not hibernate. They actually go into a cluster in the hive, kind of like a basketball. And the bees on the outside shiver to create heat to keep the bees on the inside warm. So in that hive, even if it's 30 degrees below zero outside, in that hive it can be 90 degrees in the winter. many years now I've been sending my bees to California for almond pollination. The nice thing about that is we ship our bees to California in November. They spend the winter in a warmer climate. They start their spring process of building up earlier in January. In February they go into almonds, pollinate almonds, and then they ship them back to us at the end of March, beginning of April. So we get these hives back that are full of bees, healthy, and ready to go for the Wisconsin honey season.
There are a few kinds of beekeepers out there. What are the different types of beekeepers?
Yeah, there are different types of beekeepers. There's the hobbyist who just keeps hives in his backyard because he loves the bees. He doesn't even care about the honey a lot of times. He just likes to watch the bees work. That's a hobbyist beekeeper. Then there's sideline people like myself who keep bees on the sideline. We have other jobs and we keep bees also. And typically they'll run between 25 and maybe 300-400 hives at the very most as a sideline beekeeper. And then there's a commercial beekeeper. Commercial beekeepers are typically beekeepers that run 500 to 1,000 hives and way on up to 20,000 hives. And that's their full-time job year-round.
How do you maintain the health of your bees?
So maintaining the health of the bees is very difficult for beekeepers nowadays because there's so many things affecting the health of the bees. The most important thing for beekeepers nowadays is to control the varroa mites in their hives. Varroa mites are a little mite that came into the United States in the 1980s that live on the bee, and they affect the health of the bee, so we're constantly monitoring the levels of those mites in the colonies, and that happens every couple of weeks. We're checking those numbers in there, and then taking management practices to make sure we reduce the levels of those mites in the hives. That gives us a much healthier bee, a longer living bee. And also we're giving them more nutrition. So in times of the year, like in early spring when we don't have a lot of nectar or pollen coming in, we may feed the bees and give them pollen substitutes to give them more protein to build up healthier bees. And bees going into winter, we take a lot more care in feeding them the right nutrition to make sure that we have the healthiest, fattest bees going into winter.
So someone like me who's very passionate about bees and wants to help with the bees, would you recommend I become a beekeeper?
Well, there's really, I think in my mind, nothing more fulfilling than becoming a beekeeper and being close to the bees and watching the bees and taking care of them. But a lot of people don't take the time and the effort to learn about what it takes to become a beekeeper. So yeah, if you want to become a beekeeper, start about a year out, take some classes, join a club, find a beekeeper that you can work with in their bee yard. Learn, kind of find if you really want to be doing that as far as taking care of bees, because it does take a lot of time. It's kind of like taking care of a farm animal. You have to always anticipate the needs of the bees, so it's a lot of work. But I also recommend that if somebody doesn't want to keep bees, that they can do a lot of things to help bees. And that's by maybe planting flowers that are pollinator friendly to help bees, honeybees, native bees, and butterflies, but also maybe just let part of their lawn grow into weeds and not mow it so short and green all the time. Let it grow into weeds and let it be there for the honeybees and the native bees. And then also just maybe even planting a field of flowers for native bees and natural pollinators. So there's lots of ways to help the bees without becoming a beekeeper.
Bee thought. Bees are cool, wasps are jerks. Bees will sting you in defense of their hives, whereas wasps will sting you just because they want your lunch. Bees sting with a barbed stinger. So when they sting you, their guts are ripped out of them, so they lose their lives. Wasps will just sting you over and over and over again. Like, they don't care. Bees have a lot more at stake when they're stinging you. So bees are gentle creatures, so be safe and be kind. I wanted to see Kent's store, the Dancing Bear Apiary, to learn more about the gifts given to us by the bees. So you have a vertically integrated business, meaning you are doing things start to finish. Why did you want to choose a business model like that?
Well, I enjoy working with all aspects of bees and honey. So by running the bees, managing the bees, and also selling the honey directly to the consumer, I control the honey from the hive all the way to the bottle. And it lets me provide the best possible honey to the end user. And it's also fun because I get to meet a lot of my customers and get to see their appreciation for honey and sell them different kinds of honey. It's just a really fun way for someone to be involved in all aspects of the process.
I mean, there's a lot that goes into honey, a lot of biology and things like that. So I see back here you got a lot of honey. What makes them different? Why is something darker or lighter than another?
Sure. Well, what makes honey different colors or different flavors depends on what the bee collects the nectar from. For example, the alpaca wildflower honey is very specific to alpaca. We have people that drive from far away just to get this specific blend of honeys. And it depends on what the bees are collecting the nectar from. So in Alpaca County, we have white Dutch clover in June, and yellow sweet clover, and spotted knapweed, and basswood, and many local flowers here. So it's kind of a taste from the area.
You used to be the president of the Wisconsin Honey Producers Association. Why did you want to do that, and how do you feel like that helped other beekeepers?
It's good for beekeepers to be connected to other beekeepers because, like I said, there's so much to learn, and it's hard to learn beekeeping in a vacuum. So I always recommend that people start by joining a county club, and there's multiple county clubs across the state. But the Wisconsin Honey Producers is an organization that kind of links beekeepers from all over the state together. So when we get together for our summer meeting or our annual conference, we get to learn from each other.
Awesome. So can we take a tour of your store?
Yes, I'd love to show you our store. Something you can't find everywhere.
Hearing the plight of bees from the perspective of someone who works so closely with bees adds depth to the problem facing our bees. I checked back in with Charlie to share what I'd learned. So, Charlie, I've learned a little bit about beekeeping. It's very interesting, but another thing about beekeeping that's cool is that it's practical. Like, you can make stuff with it. So we know that honey is a byproduct of bees, but there's so much more. What other byproducts are there for bees?
Yeah, so the bees bring us all kinds of different types of things, and we use them to make a bunch of different products.
Some of the gifts that bees provide for us are honey, wax, and propolis.
But over here we've got propolis. Now propolis is a really neat substance that formerly was not liked by beekeepers because it's generally really sticky and hard to work with. But when we talk to the Eastern European beekeepers who've been doing this for a long time, this is medicine. In fact, this is the bees' medicine. And propolis can be used either internally or externally, topically or ingested, as a way to help heal because it's antimicrobial and antibacterial. If you've got a sore throat, you can soothe that sore throat by giving it a wash.
With propolis, Charlie has created a variety of products to help us humans out. Rough skin doesn't stand a chance against propolis. So obviously honey, we have honey, and it's very much a big bee byproduct. Where does honey come from?
Honey is the nectar from a flower, and every different type of flower has a different type of nectar. At one point in time, that flowers were the planet's first advertisers. So when we look at honey, we can look at it in a whole different way and start to say, where did this honey come from? What time of the year was it? And what plant might it have come from? So some of the honeys that we have are monofloral. They're one flower that somebody came in and said, ooh, all of the lavender is in bloom, or all the acacia is in bloom. We're going to put our hive right there and get something straight from that. And others are just wildflowers, many, many different types. So multifloral, polyfloral. And then some of the stuff we just kind of call seasonal regional. So if you set a beehive down, nature moves. And so if you think about it, the flowers of spring are different than the flowers of fall and different than the flowers of summer. So we're going to try a couple of different ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to try some from around the world a little bit.
Yeah, international.
So here's one that I went to Slovenia and I watched the way they did beekeeping. And their beekeeping is a little bit different than ours because they kind of honey hunt. They're the ones that will look at an area and say, ooh, those trees are in bloom right now, or ooh, those wildflowers are in bloom. So this is a wildflower patch that they had in the mountain regions in a part of Slovenia.
There we go.
And it's got a nice rich flavor to it, but what do you like about it? Is there anything in particular you can taste?
I like that richness of it. It's very sweet, kind of almost it has a root beer flavor to it, and it's I like that. It's a very rich flavor to it. I like it.
And so we can contrast that with with a monofloral that came from California when the avocados were all in bloom, and
Yeah.
a commercial beekeeper brought a whole bunch of bees down to help them pollinate so they can have lots and lots of avocados, because we need one in every grocery store, right?
Yeah.
So this stuff is a very dark honey, and an avocado plant is not a deep root plant. So this is just the nectar that comes from that kind of a plant,
Yeah.
and it's got a very different taste. Like smokier? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it doesn't feel as rich, but it definitely is sweeter, I feel like, than the other one.
We make a cinnamon honey, and so this is a cinnamon honey that we used. Penzi's Spices is right here, and they have this wonderful Vietnamese cinnamon, which is super pungent. And so we add a little bit of finely ground Vietnamese cinnamon and blend it, and it,
Yeah, I mean, that's got like a nice little spice to it.
And then this is something I got from my friend who went skiing in Japan, and he
Okay.
picked up some, so the flowers of the Pacific Rim.
Yeah, that one is very different than the other ones. It has an aftertaste to it that's like almost like licorice, kind of like that
Yeah,
flavor to it.
Bitter but not bitter. But yeah, so you've got a whole different type of tropical plant type of thing that's going on there that's not going on in other places. The best honey that you can get, in my opinion, is the stuff that's straight out of the hive. So this stuff is right out of the beehive, and you can even eat the wax if you want to. And there's a growing audience of people who love it, and we call it beekeeper's gum.
Oh,
And the reason we call it beekeeper's gum is because you can eat the wax,
Yeah,
and you can chew it.
can I try some of this guy right here?
Totally can, yeah.
Okay.
Bust off a piece.
Here we go. Oh, ready?
And that's as good as it gets. I mean, that's straight from the bees to you.
Yeah.
And it's got the super great taste to it. You can chew that, and you can swallow it. It's high in antioxidants and can actually lower cholesterol. And then when you go to Walmart, you can get that.
The classic clove honey right there. Yeah.
And see, after going through all this other stuff, if you can just kind of taste a difference. It's one of those things where if you've just been eating that kind of stuff, you'd think that's honey.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, honey, okay, that's good. And the minute you start eating other stuff, you're like, whoa, this is...
It's not like it tastes like corn syrup. It doesn't taste the same as all these other like honeys. Well, this was a sweet experience for sure, Charlie. I really appreciate you letting me try all these honeys. Did you hear the one about a bee's favorite subject in school? Bet you didn't know it was math. Bees are actually very intelligent when it comes to geometric theory. For example, their honeycomb is an offset hexagonal pattern, which is both strong and lightweight. They're better at geometry than I am. So, Charlie, I'm just one person. What can I do for the bees? I know we've talked a lot about honeybees, but there's so many kinds of bees. What can I do for all kinds of bees?
Well, the first thing that we always tell everybody is the most important thing you can do is just to be a believer in the bees. Only we spell it L-E-A-V-E-R, leave the bees be. Bees are not wasps, so they won't crash your picnic. So what can you do is, number one, think about when you're buying at the store, try and buy local food, because that's helping the local pollinators.
Okay.
And then when you're going into your garden, try and make flowers, plant flowers that are local or that are in the region, and try and plant them in abundance.
Bees teach us a lot. I headed over to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Milwaukee, where they house bees on the roof, to talk with Charlie further about his bee philosophy.
All right, Charlie, your organization is called Bee Evangelist. Why is that?
Because we ended up on a church roof, and because the church community embraced us, I took a swing towards a theologic or beologic view of what do the bees bring to the world. And so watching what they do is is mesmerizing and philosophizing. You can study the bees and learn about so much in life. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm proclaiming the gospel of abundance according to bees.
What lessons can we learn from bees?
Gibran wrote a quote about how to the flower, the bees are the messengers of love, and to the bees, the flowers are the nectar or the givers of life. And so when we look at that symbiotic relationship between the bees and their surroundings, it's love. The way of the bees is the way of nature. And inside the hive is the way the bees address their surroundings.
Well, thanks, Charlie. Thanks for being my guide on this journey, being my bee sensei in a sense. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot.
Shannon, it was a pleasure to be able to take you on the journey and help you to become a believer. And I think you're becoming a bee-disciple.
You hear that, guys? I'm a bee-disciple. Bees are incredible creatures. They're a being. They're a living, breathing organism that's constantly moving. They focus on their community. They're not self-centered, and I think we could learn a lot from that. Also, bees teach us how to be good students of nature. They show us how to take care of this world that we've been given. And I think we could be a little bit more like bees. So be safe, be gentle, and as always, be kind.